Salutations, everyone. Welcome back to another Victoria 3 guide. I'm Lord Foreman, and today we are not going to be talking about the Great Qing. We are going to be talking about the economic engines. So I've already done basic trade and basic economy. This is a slightly more advanced one for people wanting to build up their nations faster. It shouldn't be as long. If there are sections that need to be divided up, I'll put them below in chapters, but I think it's going to be a pretty straightforward one. So we're going to talk about how to build things up. So there's a core series of buildings that allow you to build and produce things faster. And we're going to look at them right here. So the first one is your construction sector. At the beginning, to build stuff, you require fabric and wood. Okay, that's nice. However, it does limit the amount of constructions and construction efficiency you have. If you reform to iron frame buildings, you need less wood and less fabric, but you need tools and iron. This is important because this is one of your first little trifectas of growth. So if we swap to this, now we need tools and iron. Well, there's a really great synergy here between tools and iron. If you look at tooling workshops, they require iron and wood. Obviously, wood is gained from your lumber camps. But the fact you need iron to produce tools, and if we were to look at an iron mine, you will see once we change to atmospheric pump here, or actually just even picks and shovels, we are going to be requiring tools. So you require iron to produce tools and tools to produce iron. That's a nice little synergy there. The other thing is when you reform your logging camps, from simple forestry to sawmills, you now, if you look to the right here, you require tools. So now we've got this nice little combination of things going. We require wood and iron to make tools, and we use said tools to get iron and wood. Okay, that sounds good. So now if we look at iron mines, to get more production out of them, we move to the atmospheric pump engine. Now the atmospheric pump engine requires coal. Okay, so if we look at a coal mine, you will see in order to get coal in at the level 2, we require tools. So now we get tools. We use that to produce iron and wood to get us more tools. We also use those tools to produce coal, which then we use to mine more iron. This is the basic engine for your growth, and you want to keep it going. All the other resources and stuff are used for doing stuff like building furniture or doing textile mills to produce clothing. And this is where you're going to generate a lot of your money from, building and producing these resources that everyone requires to buy. But in terms of an industrial buildup, and the reason we're using this Chinese civilization here is because they have them all right here. So if you play these guys, you really can just build up from these 3 or 4 regions. So, iron, coal, tool workshops, and logging camps are the first stage of the engineer growth. At the first level, you just require tools, which is fine because tools are easy to produce from iron. So it's tools, iron. Then we've expanded to tools, iron, logging, and coal. Well, what happens if we go to the next level? So let's look at, we'll start with the iron mines. So we're just going to look at this column for the moment. If we move to condensing engine, still requires tools and coal. It's not until you get to diesel that you require oil, and we're not going to cover that because very few people have easy access to oil in the game. So let's look at the next line here. Production methods. Manual drilling requires nothing. If we are switched to nitroglycerin here, now we require explosives. Okay. And if we continue down to dynamite, we also require explosives. So how do you make explosives? Well, for explosives, they are made in chemical plants. Now, it's not that straightforward to producing chemical plants because we need certain resources. So if we are to, let's go through all of this. Oh, come on. We'll just go through the market. Explosives, where are you? Well, you start getting chemical plants here from intensive agriculture, which is an important thing to do. And then from that, you can produce fertilizer. Now, fertilizer is only part of how you produce it because one of the levels of production for the chemical plants, and I'll switch to another civilization in a minute to show you that, requires some tech to change how your chemical plant works. Okay, here we are, one of my later Great Britain games, Midway Save. So let's look at chemical plants. So a chemical plant, and we'll just put it all the way back to where you start from it. So at level 1, you don't produce any explosives. So you have to refine this by getting various tech. At level 1, to produce explosives, you need coal. Level 2, you need coal and sulfur. Level 3, you still need coal and sulfur. And finally, at the end, you require electricity. So now we've added 2 more steps to our economic engine. We require sulfur and chemical plants, as well as more coal, and obviously more iron as we keep going, which means you need to build a sulfur plant, and you also need to build a chemical plant. Okay, that's nice and simple. So that is how we expand the iron mines. Now, for improving our, say, logging camps, the only thing we can do beyond sawmills is straight to electric, which is pretty straightforward, so we're not going to talk too much about how you generate electricity. Suffice to say, you use engines and stuff. And if we look at the coal plants, to expand them also requires explosives, as well as tools. And theoretically, we can also eventually expand it to steam donkeys, which require engines as well, and use up some coal. And that also applies for the iron mines as well. You can reform that as well. So now we're looking at an engine that includes iron, wood, coal, sulfur, explosives to generate our stuff to produce resources. Now, what happens if we expand our construction sector to the next level? Well, now we're looking at steel frame buildings, and the steel frame buildings require completely different stuff. Now we require glass and steel. Thankfully, glass is relatively straightforward. Here we go. Glassworks, well, at level 1, we'll look at glassworks. They just require wood. Okay. But obviously, you're probably not going to be on that. You'll probably be on like bone china, which requires dye. So you have to find dye. Either you grow it at a plantation, you import it, or later on you build a synthetic factory. But all that additionally adds is in ceramic, so technically you don't need to do it. Now, in terms of your other glass stuff, the first reform here requires lead, meaning, guess what? A lead mine has been added in, and then further on, even more lead. So let's look at how you get your lead mines. I'm pretty sure we have one up here somewhere. Okay, here we are looking at the lead mines, and it turns out in Ireland in this case. If you notice here, they require explosives, tools, and coal to generate lead. So in case you're noticing the trend here, you're going to be using tools and coal for a lot, so make sure you build plenty of those plants. You're also going to be requiring a mass amount of iron to build it. You kind of have to build up all of these resource buildings at roughly the same rate in order to keep driving your engine of production. But then we've started to add lead into it, and what are we using lead for? Well, we're using lead to produce glass, and later on munitions and electricity. So now we've gotten all through all of those, but now we have to start talking about steel. So you build a steel mill. What goes into a steel mill? Surprise to surprise, iron, coal, and tools. Iron, coals, and tool are the core of your industry. Everything else comes out of them and then flows back into them. They are your main production methods. And assuming you don't run across a shortage, you can theoretically run them on low levels, generating low amounts of resources, but the higher methods are better. Once you generate steel, then you can do the higher production. And finally, once again, if you're going for arc welding, the biggest change here is now you require electricity. Electricity generation is relatively simple. You build electricity, and how you produce electricity gets a little bit more complex because now you require motors. And the motors, of course, are used in a power plant to produce electricity. In order to produce an engine, this is where the complexity of the game comes into it. Again, we require steel, coal, and tools. Now, steel is kind of replacing iron here, but consider we use iron, coal, and tools to produce steel. It's not too far out of the way to do this, and you should already be producing steels for when you're doing the steel production building. Then you get the motors. You're going to use the motors in your railroads to help move stuff better and to help generate electricity, which will then increase it. So basically, your generation of production, obviously talking about your construction as well as the resources needed to build and run everything else, starting very simply, tools, iron, wood, expanding to tools, iron, wood, coal, tools, iron, wood, sulfur, chemical plants, tools, iron, wool, sulfur, chemical plants, steel plants, lead plants, further on into engines, and then electricity. And that's your economic engine. So for people wondering how to build up quickly, that is kind of how you do it. The reason you need to build up those industries, even though you could theoretically just build tons of construction sectors, is then your construction goods are going to shoot out of the roof. As it is, all of my resources here are relatively expensive to produce. That's just because we're using so many of them, but we are growing at 85 and we still have a large portion of the game to go, and we're easily the number one power in this British game. So when you tech up, don't immediately upgrade to the next production levels. If we go back to the Chinese here, we don't have all of the access to these advanced methods because our technology is low, but we can very quickly start getting them. And it's important to get them in such a way that you don't go too far down one before you come back and grab the others. Atmospheric engine is huge because that's when you start being able to use coal. Intensive agriculture is needed for the chemical plants, which will allow you to get the explosives. And then obviously you can already mine stuff like sulfur. I recommend that before you switch to a new level of production, you might already have one or two of those buildings built, and then you can obviously build more if you still have a shortage. This goes with just my general philosophy of building one of all resource and agriculture buildings is a good idea, just so you have a base access to them and then can upgrade and see what you're using. So if we look at the Chinese here, in Beijing itself, we have lead and wood. Over here, and however you say this, you've got coal, iron, sulfur, and wood. Down here, again, we've got coal, sulfur, and iron. And right here, basically, with the addition of lead from here, you've got all you need to run a modern-day industry in 4 Chinese provinces. Now, this is China we're talking about. If you wandered up here and looked at someone like, say, Belgium, you might notice that Belgium has access to everything except for sulfur, meaning they either have to obtain a source or import it. Most major countries are going to have access to at least coal and wood, if not other resources. The poor Netherlands here suffers in terms of being a great nation because they don't have any iron mines. Now, a nation like France, England, Prussia, Russia, Austria, the Ottomans, basically any large nation, including the US, is going to have access to all those resources. The game is prejudiced towards making them be more successful. If you are a minor nation, you definitely have to get a source of importing those resources, or, and it is a decision you might consider, joining a larger market of a greater nation so that you can build up. And once you've built up your economy, what you're going to want to do is deploy your military, ideally, and conquer a nation that has those resources. Or just stay a subject to that nation. But if you want to become a great power and conquer parts of the world, you need your own supply of those resources so that within your own market, you're productive. Now, if we wandered over here and looked at Japan, one of the few isolationist nations, they have lead, sulfur, coal, iron, wood. They also have, higher up here, they have whaling to even get them access to coal. They literally have every type of resource they need to become a great power in their lands. It's quite an interesting challenge playing Japan, but you can build up a modern industry, and I'm pretty sure the game designers made sure Japan had just enough resources to become a great power, like they historically did at this time. So that's kind of it. Focus on building up tools, iron, wood to start, then add in coal, and keep going up that way. Make sure to checking your inputs and your outputs of your buildings, as well as what changing production methods will require. To some degree, it will adjust automatically, but the costs can be a problem. If you run across your economy crashing, in my experience, it's due to having not enough iron or tools. Those two tend to sink your economy faster than anything else. Tools is the largest culprit. Your tooling workshop, first off, in case you don't know, you should try and build an industry up in one location due to this throughput. Basically, the larger of a building, the economy of scale. This is a level 4 building. It's 3% more productive than if I built 4 tooling workshops in different provinces. Obviously, it's not an issue for the Chinese here because you have a stupidly massive workforce, but in a smaller nation, you may have to decentralize a bit. But centralizing almost always is better. It also applies for your resources as well. Higher level, more throughput or throughput. So in somewhere like China, just build up 4 provinces, ignore all the other, and then slowly fill them out when you run out of population. Elsewhere, you still want to be as centralized as can be. Ideally, each province should focus, or each state should focus into one industry if you can. Decentralizing doesn't help. That even includes government buildings and everything else. Anyway, that's the guide here on trying to build your economic engine up better and grow faster and faster without totally crashing your economy. Hopefully it helped you. If it did, leave a like, comment, subscribe, or give me more advice for other people to use. And I'll see you guys all in another guide, let's play, or live stream. Bye for now.